All right, thanks for tuning in to the OFN meeting room as we talk Philadelphia Eagles football post-draft. And we're going to do that with our special guest, Mike Kay. He's the Eagles beat writer for NJ.com and co-host of the No Huddle Show. Good to talk to you again, Mike.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk to you.
Well, so am I, because interesting. What I do when I go over all the draft picks, of course, I have the Ourlads draft guide right here.
Mm-hmm.
So what I do is I'll check and see where the team slotted the players and where the Ourlads guide had the players slotted themselves. And I don't know if this is something to do with Dan, because Dan used to work for the Eagles, and even though we work for several other teams, the Eagles are like his team. But the Eagles, if I had to grade it just based on Ourlads grades, I'd say the Eagles probably did the best for Ourlads, because if you just take a look at John Hightower, round 5, Ourlads grade 3rd round. Round 6, Prince Tego Wanago, offensive tackle, grade 3rd round, round 6 pick. And Casey Toohill, 3rd round grade, and he was taken in round 7. And the team also signed a couple of rookie free agents, Raekwon Williams and Dante Olson, who had 4th and 5th round grades. So as far as Ourlads is concerned, the Eagles had a really good draft. How do you think the team did, and how did the fans believe the team did?
Well, from my perspective, I thought they had. I've been covering the NFL for over a decade. I thought their day 3 was maybe the most impressive I've ever seen for an NFL franchise. I mean, the wheeling and dealing that Howie Roseman did. He made a trio of trades, then was able to not only draft in bulk on that day and add picks, but he was able to add Marquise Goodwin for dropping 20 spots in the 6th round. Then on top of that, as I first reported for NJ.com, they had him drop his salary significantly from, I believe it was around $4 million down to $1.35 million. So they're basically getting a flyer to pick up a speedster that they definitely needed. You brought up Prince Tega Wanago. I think he's one of the biggest steals in the draft. And then you look at a guy like Kayvon Wallace, who they got in the 4th round, who I think is going to be a long-term starter for this team. It's strong safety. He can play nickel. He can play free safety. But I think he was one of the best fit players to take over for that Malcolm Jenkins Rover role that they haven't played dime linebacker. They haven't played some nickel. They haven't played strong safety. They haven't played some free safety, too. To me, he was their best pick, but I think from a value standpoint, you look at Prince Tega Wanago, if he doesn't have that lateral meniscus tear in his right knee, he's definitely a day 2 guy. I think when you look at their draft as a whole, their first 2 days were kind of underwhelming in a lot of people's estimation. Jalen Reagor, they took with the 21st overall pick, passing up Justin Jefferson, who you and I talked about last time as being the more productive option.
Yeah.
They really liked Reagor a lot. He fit exactly what they wanted to do. They wanted to get faster. They wanted to have a lateral threat. I mean, they wanted to have a deep threat that they could get the ball down to, create a lot of chunk plays, because obviously they were missing that last year. They missed speed, and so how they made up for it was drafting Reagor, trading for Goodwin, drafting Hightower, and then drafting Quez Watkins, who is another intriguing player as well. I think when you look at what they did from a wide receiver standpoint, I think they're better from a projection standpoint. I think they are better long term, but their issue right now is going to be you're depending on 3 rookies, a player who's never played, who hasn't played 16 games for a full season in several years, Deshaun Jackson, who's coming off of injury, Alshon Jeffrey, who's coming off of injury. They're still pretty unknown at that wide receiver position. The big news was obviously Jalen Hurts, which the fan base absolutely hated in the 2nd round. I felt like it was a bad pick from a standpoint of immediacy. If you think this team's a Super Bowl contender, you should get a player that either helps Carson Wentz or helps the defense, which in turn helps Carson Wentz because he's not going to have to be in shootouts. Jeremy Chin was on the board. Logan Wilson was on the board. They really had a lot of really appealing options at at their disposal, and they decided to go with Jalen Hurts, a guy who, does need some development. I see him developing for at least 2 years before he's ready to start an NFL game. And then on top of that, Carson Wentz's massive extension kicks in next year. So you're tied to Carson for a really long time, but you're also trying to develop a guy behind him who could eventually be a threat to his job. And I don't see how that really helps you in the short term. But again, the Eagles were not looking for that short-term fix. They've spent a ton of money on guys like Nick Foles and Josh McCown and Chase Daniel over the years. And now with Carson about to hit his, contract plateau and his contract rising, they want to spend less on their backup. And so they felt like Jalen Hurts was the right move after they failed with their Clayton Thorson experiment. They wanted a cheap backup for the long term. He's a guy who can do that. He can also help in certain packages as well because of his athleticism. They drafted Davian Taylor in the 3rd round. He's, again, another guy who I don't think is an immediate impact player.
No.
But his upside is tremendous.
Mm-hmm.
So I think they look at that as the linebacker position is a position they're not going to ever really invest in. And I think they look at this as a long-term move to have a cheap starting weak side linebacker who can play 3 downs moving forward.
Yeah, and back to Hurts, do you also think it's an indication that the organization doesn't have faith that Carson Wentz can stay healthy?
See, I see that narrative a lot, and I don't really buy into it because if they were really concerned about him, why would they take on a guy who's going to need to develop over the next couple of years? He also doesn't naturally fit their quarterback prototype. Doug Peterson typically likes guys who are 6'4" and up, who are roughly 220, 230. I mean, he is a bulky quarterback, but again, he's not Carson Wentz. He doesn't look like Nick Foles. He doesn't look like Clayton Thorson, who, in my opinion, was drafted because he was basically a Doug Peterson clone. It's an intriguing situation because from what I've been told, Howie Roseman fell in love with Jalen Hurts at the Senior Bowl. And he was a guy that they just really, really liked. The Eagles are very big on locker room and personality cohesion. And he was a guy that they felt was able to fit their locker room. They think he will get along with Carson Wentz moving forward. They feel like maybe they can flip him down the road for a 1st-round pick. Carson Wentz hasn't been able to finish the season healthy in 3 years. He played all 16 games last year, but he was knocked out of the 1st round of the playoffs within the 1st quarter. Obviously, it was a freak incident where he had the concussion, but, if you're the Eagles, I don't think you're worried necessarily about losing Carson in the next 2 years. I think you're concerned about a potential Luke Kuechly situation where he takes so many beatings over the years and his playing style is so physical that maybe once he reaches 30, 32, you're kind of, at a loss with him. Maybe he wants to move on. So I think that's a concern, but I also think the major concern for them was managing the salary cap, being able to put money into other positions while not worrying about the backup quarterback position. And they're a team that wants to develop quarterbacks. They've been that way since the Andy Reid era. They want to be able to have 2 really strong quarterbacks in that room. And right now, they have Nate Sudfeld, who's been around for years and consistently been passed on for that number 2 job. And you have Jalen Hurts, who's got that high upside. And I think they even have Kyle Lauletta, who was a guy who saw some playing time with the Giants a couple of years ago. So they want to make that quarterback room competitive. The backup quarterback position has been the focus of this team for several years. And I think Hurts is a guy that comes in and gives you some long-term outlook as opposed to Nick Foles, who you knew was not going to be there long-term. You knew Chase Daniel wasn't going to be there long-term. Josh McCown definitely was not going to be there long-term. And I think the Eagles can look back at that 1st-round playoff loss if they didn't have Nate Sudfeld active. So when Josh McCown injured himself in the first half, they had no other option other than Greg Ward, and they weren't going to move Greg Ward to be the quarterback for an entire half of football. So I think what you look at with Jalen Hurts is you have Jalen Hurts play another role, so all 3 quarterbacks are active on game day, and so you don't run into that situation again. You couldn't do that with Nate Sudfeld and Josh McCown last year because both guys aren't playing other positions.
Yeah. Well, look, I like the philosophy myself. I think every team should have that philosophy, and I get it how you opened it as far as this is a team that's trying to win a championship. It's a premium position. Chances are, unless there's an injury, he's not going to be used potentially for a couple of years. So I get all of that. I wonder whether or not it was also one of those things where they just looked at their board and the player that would have been a second option was just a little bit too far down. And they said, we gotta stick to our board here instead of maybe reaching for another position player that's on our board. I mean, I'm just guessing, but I could see that being a possibility. Do you think it's also possible that they wanted to make sure they got hurt and another team, maybe like the Cowboys, didn't?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think, there is some gamesmanship. If you look at what they did with Dallas Goedert a couple of years ago, the Cowboys really wanted him. They jumped him. They jumped the Cowboys for him. And, I think from the Eagles' perspective, like, they've seen guys that they really like go to the team before. They liked Sean Lee several years ago. He got drafted. They liked, Amari Cooper not Amari Cooper. CeeDee Lamb was a guy they liked, but they didn't jump up for him, and the Cowboys grabbed him. So I think there is some gamesmanship between the two teams.
All right. So receiver, it's interesting because all three receivers, as you said, are all fast, including Watkins. He ran like a 4.3. So he's really fast. Is he going to be used if you look at those? Just the two rookies, but also, of course, actually the three rookies. But Watkins, is he like a special teams guy? One of those guys going to be returning kicks out of the three?
I think that Reagor will be the one that returns punts. Okay. I could see Hightower returning kicks, but I could also see Reagor returning kicks as well. They brought back Corey Clement, who could also do the job. Kick returning isn't what it used to be, as you know, because of the rule changes. Watkins could make the roster based on that. Right now, I think he's a long-term project, but, I mean, I guess we'll see. Sure. I mean, I just don't – it's hard for me to find a role for him because I do think Hightower is the better prospect. I think Hightower is more likely to play the X role than Watkins. And right now, if Jeffrey starts the season on PUP, they really only have J.J. Arcega-Whiteside who can play the X position regularly, so they're going to need that backup.
All right. Now, you mentioned Taylor, and yes, this is definitely a developmental prospect because he had little high school experience, JC early in his career, so really only has a couple of years of big-time college football, but he's got outstanding speed for the position. He can tackle well, and I just based on his profile, looks like somebody that's going to be asked to do a lot of covering, tight ends, running backs. He also has the ability to cover the occasional slot receiver. So that speed's going to be a big-time help. And then sticking with linebackers, they went with Shawn Bradley in round 6 and Casey Toohill, who I mentioned, had a third-round grade in round 7.
Yeah, so Toohill will convert to being a full-time defensive end. Okay. He put his hand in the dirt a little bit at Stanford, but was mostly a stand-up linebacker. Probably projects in most defenses as like the elephant or the Otto Sam linebacker, but I think they really like his physical tools. I think they think that he can create a lot of mismatches. To me, he's competing with Jannard Avery, another guy who they feel like can move around at linebacker and defensive end and kind of use him as a situational package player. So he's an interesting talent. I could see him being a practice squad player, but I could also see him beating out Avery, who the Eagles acquired for a 2021 fourth-round pick last year. He didn't really get the amount of playing time that a lot of people projected him to get last year, but he also did come mid-year. So it'll be interesting to see after a full year, or not a full year, but several months in the defense, if Avery can really take advantage of his scholarship. You know, you're going to invest a fourth-round pick in a fourth-round pick that you haven't even given up yet. He's going to have to get a fair shot at winning a job, and I think him versus Toohill is very interesting. talk about Shawn Bradley. Shawn Bradley's going to be a guy who plays special teams. He's a little bit raw. He's kind of on the Davian Taylor side with less athleticism. He's a guy that I think they like as a potential replacement for Camus Grugier-Hill, who was a special teams ace, a special teams captain, eventually grew into a starting role, but I think he's a ways away from getting meaningful time on defense.
And if we're talking linebackers, we also have to mention Dante Olson. 5th round grade. They sign him as a free agent. And this is a guy who was the FCS Defensive Player of the Year, a 2-time FCS All-American, led the FCS with 179 tackles. It may not be very fast for the position, but the fact is he's productive, and even though it's the FCS level, you got him for free, basically.
Yeah, and he's a guy that, if you look at his signing bonus, they didn't really offer him a ton of money. He's not a guy who is really someone that a lot of teams went after because of his brutal 40 time. I don't have it in front of me, but he had a pretty rough 40 time. So, teams pass, and this is a speed league. I think he's a guy that's going to compete on special teams. He's kind of in that Alex Singleton mode, where they're going to compete for that 6th linebacker spot if they keep 6 linebackers. But if you look at the Eagles, they have a lot of guys who they value on special teams first and then on defense. Like Nate Gary is a guy who has led the team in special team snaps for the last few years. He's going to be the starting will linebacker. TJ Edwards played the 2nd or 3rd most special team snaps. He's going to probably be their starting middle linebacker. Duke Riley revitalized his career by being named a special teams captain last year after being traded from Atlanta to Philadelphia in October. And he's a special teams player. He's probably going to be their starting Sam linebacker. Jatavius Brown, who they brought in from the Chargers, played nothing but special teams pretty much last year after a really terrible early season performance on defense. Singleton's a special teams player. Davian Taylor projects as immediate special teams asset. So it's almost like they value special teams significantly more than they value defense when it comes to linebacker play. And so I think Dante Olson has a shot if he can really stand out in Dave Phipp's system in the 3rd phase of the game.
Well, so we can segue special teams to Kevon Wallace as well, because that's what Wallace is going to be able to do right away. He was a successful cover guy for Clemson. He's only one of 2 new defensive backs between the draft and signings, because Graylin Arnold could be interesting. I know he wasn't in the draft guide, but you're talking about a 2nd-team All-American. You're talking about a guy with punt return skills. I know he's a small guy, but still, I think the Eagles are a team that could probably use some more competition back there, and we'll see if Arnold can even at least make the practice squad. But what do you think Wallace, what's his specialty going to be? What's he going to bring to the Eagles defense more than anything?
Well, like I said earlier, I think he's the perfect long-term replacement for Malcolm Jenkins. He has the ability to play the nickel position. He has the ability to be that 3rd big nickel safety in big dime packages. He can play free safety a bit. He can play strong safety. He's a very good blitzer. I think what you'll see long-term from him is he'll be the starting strong safety by the time the season's over. Right now, the Eagles have former starting cornerback Jalen Mills penciled in as the starting strong safety, with Will Parks, the former Denver Broncos player, playing that big nickel safety in dime packages. But I think Kayvon will compete with both of them and eventually get one of those 2 jobs. He's just so good. And I think the team is very excited about him. You bring up Graylin Arnold. Howie Roseman was effusive in his praise in 2 separate radio interviews immediately after the draft, brought him up unsolicited. So he's a guy that I think they're going to have interest in, because what the Eagles are trying to do is they're trying to create a positionless secondary. They want guys who have corner and safety experience. In order to play in Jim Schwartz's defense at this juncture, you have to be able, or you have to have some cornerback background, whether you play cornerback or safety. So when you look at guys like Will Parks was a nickel corner when he came into the NFL, even though he played safety at Arizona. You look at a guy like Roddy McLeod, who played some cornerback at Virginia. You look at somebody like Jalen Mills, who's played corner and safety. Nicole Roby-Coleman can play safety or corner. Avante Maddox can play safety or corner. The only guy who's really a set corner in this group is Rasul Douglas, because they don't want to move him to safety as much as fans have kind of argued for it because of his size and his ability to tackle. Darius Slay is a guy who can move around and take on the opposing team's best passing threat. Sometimes that passing threat is going to be a tight end, or it's going to be a running back.
Mm-hmm.
And for Darius Slay to go into the slot, you need to have two guys who can play very well outside or play well in, reverse cover 2 looks. You have to have safeties that can cover. And I think adding a guy like Wallace, adding a guy like Arnold makes you a better and more versatile secondary, and that's what the Eagles are looking for.
Now, you mentioned Douglas. Why has his name been out there for most of the offseason as a potential trade option? Is that just a rumor not to believe, or is there a reason behind it?
Well, he was benched for the playoff game after starting pretty much the majority of the regular season. So fans took that as maybe they're probably not that into him. Sidney Jones is a guy who's also struggled. Both of those guys, taken back-to-back during the 2017 NFL draft, have both had their struggles, but for different reasons. Rasul Douglas has been the most durable player in their secondary. He's just been extremely inconsistent with his play. The coaching staff hasn't really favored him, using him as anything other than a last-ditch effort to shore up the secondary. Sidney Jones has battled injuries. This offseason, Howie Roseman was asked about both corners, and he gave a bit of some leeway to Jones, but kind of downplayed Douglas. So as I reported on NJ.com a couple of weeks ago, Rasul Douglas took a pay cut to stick around in Philadelphia after he wasn't traded during the draft. They did seek potential trade interest. It just wasn't going to work out for them with Rasul. So they're bringing him back. They want to make it work. He's the guy that's kind of an awkward fit for the whole presentation. But that said, if another team suffers an injury at cornerback and favors bigger corners, I mean, Rasul's 6'2" and he's over 200 pounds. He could be of interest to another team given his starting experience and his ability to make plays on the ball.
Yeah, I mean, the Jets just seem to make too much sense to me, because the Jets, even now, because there's negotiation apparently with Logan Ryan, Jets need another veteran corner. I don't think they're going to sign Ryan unless his price comes down. So, and the connections are obvious. But nothing's happened. So I don't know if that's still possible. Maybe it is. Maybe it's still a possibility that if Douglas is traded, he gets traded to the Jets.
Yeah, I mean, I was a little surprised that deal did not go down. He is a draft pick of Joe Douglas. So it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out. I think that Joe Douglas is higher on Rasul Douglas than the coaching staff probably is in Philadelphia.
Okay, I'll keep that in mind. All right, and by the way, I was also kind of surprised. I don't know about you, that they didn't draft a corner earlier, because once you do get past the top 2, there are a lot of questions. But looks like they're just going to go back with the top 4 or 5 guys that were there last year. Well, Slay, of course, is the big addition, but everybody else is back. So were you surprised they didn't add at least another corner early in the draft?
I wasn't, because they have really shown a lot of confidence in Avante Maddox. Avante Maddox played very well down the stretch in 2018 as an outside corner.
Yep.
He struggled a bit as a nickel corner, even though that's his more natural position last year. And so I think what they want to do is they want Avante Maddox to compete with Sidney Jones and Rasul Douglas. Avante is the runaway favorite here.
Sure.
Though Sidney Jones has been working out in Texas and getting some help with his physicality and stuff like that. He's working with Will Parks' trainer, who I forget his name off the top of my head. So they've been encouraged by that. I just think they'd like for Avante Maddox and Darius Slay to start. You have either Sidney Jones or Rasul Douglas as the main backup outside corner. Mm-hmm. And then at nickel, you've got an intriguing competition between Nicole Roby-Coleman, who I think is one of the more underrated players in the defensive backfield in the NFL, and then Cravon LeBlanc, who is the underdog that just won't quit, who could end up being the backup nickel guy. and you feel really good about that position moving forward. So I think they keep 5 to 6 cornerbacks. It's just a matter of what position they see Grayland Arnold playing. It depends on how the safety position shakes up, because remember, you've got Jalen Mills back there, and he's playing strong safety, but that doesn't stop you from potentially moving him to outside corner if Maddox struggles or Sidney Jones struggles. I think Mills has gotten a really bad rap because he's had to cover number 2 and number 1 wide receivers pretty much weekly. Now you have Darius Slay, who can move around the field and cover whoever their top target is. That means that Mills can go up against the number 2 guy. Typically, there's a pretty big drop-off in talent and speed against number 2 corners. So maybe that'll help him moving forward if they do decide to move him back to corner.
And as far as offensive line, Driscoll goes in the 4th round. We mentioned Wanago in the 6th with a 3rd-round grade. And they also signed another draftable player, Luke Juriga from Western Michigan. So what do you think about those 3, including, most importantly, the 2 draft picks, Driscoll and Wanago?
So Driscoll's interesting because he played a lot of guard early in his college career. Then he played right tackle at Auburn for the past 2 years. He has very short arms. He's not particularly athletic. They probably are going to use him as the backup left guard this year.
Okay.
He's also been working at center during the pre-draft process. That's a spot where he's a very intelligent player. They might like him to be a replacement for Jason Kelsey there. Not to skip over Prince again, but when you look at Juriga reads as a much taller Jason Kelsey. So he could potentially be that replacement as well. They gave him the biggest risk of any undrafted free agent. He's got the most guarantee money of any agent that they signed. So
that's
the center
Juriga.
from Western Michigan could, Juriga.
Really?
Yeah, he could be an option at center. Yes, correct. They really, really like him. And they've been in on him for a pretty long time. Now, Prince, he's going to compete to be the starting, or the first wing tackle, I guess you could say. He's competing with Australian import project Jordan Mailata, who's never played an important game in his life, or I should say a meaningful life. And then you have guys like Matt Pryor, who rather put at guard and right tackle. He's not really a left tackle at all. So it's interesting. I think both those draft picks are going to make the opening day roster. I think Juriga is really interesting when you get to the changes to the 53 or 55-man roster, however you want to word it.
Okay.
Where you can bring up 2 practice squad players. One of those practice squad players has to be an offensive lineman. I think Juriga the guy that would be a check mark for that. He's competing with Nate Herbig and Sua Opeta for probably the last offensive line spot. Both those guys were undrafted last year, but both were pretty highly touted undrafted free agents. They really like Herbig, but I could see Juriga easily beating him out because he's a more natural center.
Okay.
So it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out.
And a couple more things before I let you go. A couple more players. Raekwon Williams. I don't know how this guy doesn't get drafted. He's a 4th-round grade. Not only is he a really good athlete and he can play multiple positions, but he's a productive guy at Michigan State. They've had one of the tougher defenses in the Big Ten since he's been there. He is an all-out hustle player, a team captain type of guy that just leads by example. I don't get it. I'm sorry, but this is now look, anything's possible when it comes to why scouts believe certain players don't fit in the NFL, but he sure was a really good college player, and I thought he was going to be a mid-round pick.
Yeah, I'm actually kind of surprised he ended up signing with the Eagles because they have a logjam of defensive tackle talent. When you look at Cox, Malik Jackson, they brought in Graham, who I think was the best signing in all of free agency, if you ask me. And then they brought back Hassan Ridgeway, who I thought played extremely well in his first year in Philadelphia. He was put in a starting role when Timmy Jernigan and Malik Jackson went down. Played pretty well given the increased role. I think he's a guy, he only signed a cheap 1-year deal. I think he's a lot to go if you're Williams, you're really competing for that fifth defensive tackle spot if they keep 5 defensive tackles.
Yeah,
so
that's true.
They really like Anthony Rush, who they brought in and developed here. Albert Huggins got some snaps down the stretch. Bruce Hector's been on the roster for the past 2 seasons. So he's got some competition. I don't really understand why he jumped at Cycles as opposed to a team that had less defensive tackle depth. But then again, everybody likes playing in that wide 9. There's a bit of a nose tackle ability, and they don't really have any natural nose to roster other than Hargrave. So that could potentially be the appeal for him. And if they keep 5 defensive tackles, he's probably the favorite.
Okay, and then we'll wrap up with you got the 2 running backs, Killins and Warren, both draftable grades. And then maybe one of the intriguing guys is, and after the success that we've already seen on this team of a converted quarterback to wide receiver, we got to keep an eye on Khalil Tate because he was a dynamic player a couple of years ago for Arizona. Then they decide someone comes in town, Rich Rod is gone, and it just seemed like Tate did not take to someone's offense. There was an injury there, I believe, as well, but that's going to be interesting. Warren is the guy I'd keep an eye on out of the 2 running backs.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think he kind of adds a different element when you compare him to Corey Clement and Miles Sanders and Boston Scott. That said, though, the Eagles do have interest in adding a veteran running back. They have some time. It's just dependent on how the market shapes up. There's other teams competing for veteran guys. You hear names like Carlos Hyde and Devontae Freeman and even LaShawn McCoy. But the team typically takes 7 to 8 running backs to camp, and right now they only have 6 players, Elijah Holyfield's in that group as well. And they'll keep 4 on the main roster. Killins is interesting because he can kind of fill that Darren Sproles void, but I think he's more of a practice squad player and a long-term project. Warren's interesting because of his production at Cincinnati and his size. To me, I don't know. Before they re-signed Clement, I thought one of the 2 guys was definitely making the roster. Now it's kind of a battle between Clement and those 2 guys and Elijah Holyfield to make that 4th roster spot, because I do think they bring in a veteran running back to pair with Miles Sanders and Boston Scott.
Okay, and Tate, definitely practice squad guy that you think they'll...
100%. Yeah, Tate got he got very little guaranteed money up front. He's a guy that if you followed Greg Ward's trajectory, Greg Ward was on the practice squad for 3 straight years.
Wow, 3 years. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, he only played 7 games last year. They brought him up from the practice squad. He had to go to the AAF to draw even more interest and develop even further. So I think when you're looking at Tate, not only is he a long shot for the roster, he's probably a long shot for the practice squad. He really needs to show them something quickly. The problem there is the offseason is very restricted, and if he's going to transition to wide receiver, he's going to need to really take the coaching very well. They are frankly, while they don't have a ton of proven wide receiver talent, there's definitely a logjam of upside there. I think when you look at guys like Deontay Burnett, you look at guys like Rob Davis, Greg Ward, who helped them down the stretch. I think those guys are going to have first shot at roster and practice squad spots before Tate even gets a look. So he's going to have to start off very quickly and produce very well. And, he's kind of an up in the air guy, but I really wouldn't put too much money on him.
Yeah, I like Burnett. I'm surprised the Jets gave up on him when they did, but I think he's got from the time that he gave the Jets, I like what I saw. So I think he's got possibility of getting better with the right organization, and obviously the Eagles of that organization. My next show, by the way, Mike, believe it or not, is going to be New York Giants, Ryan Dunleavy. So
my old pal.
Yeah, the last time we talked, you had a very interesting code word, I guess you can say. What was that, brownie?
Yes, he's a brownie connoisseur.
Brownie connoisseur.
Ask him how he's doing about that.
Yeah. Yep. Anything else, or you're just a one-trick pony, brownie connoisseur? You got anything else for me?
I mean, he really likes chicken fingers.
Chicken fingers.
Yeah, he's a.
Don't we all?
He's got a very unsophisticated palate, I'll say. He's very picky and choosy. Really likes those go-to finger foods.
Finger foods.
You're not going to see him like spice it up. We'll put it that way.
Okay.
He knows what he likes, and he likes what he likes.
Sticks
you know
to
what I mean?
it. I get it. I like it. All right, excellent. The No Huddle Show, by the way, when does that air, Mike?
We're a little bit sporadic in the off season. I'm doing it with Zach Rosenblatt, a great Giants writer, who used to be my partner on the Eagles beat. But we'll have something up next week. Look for it earlier on Monday or Tuesday.
And that is available on certain platforms?
It's available on all platforms.
All platforms.
Download podcasts.
Awesome. I like it. Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it. We'll talk to you hopefully right about when training camp's going to start.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.